Greetings. I'm Paul Rudenberg here in Falmouth, Maine. I'm a veterinarian and a biology teacher, and I worked for 25 years in veterinary work in Haiti. During that time, in 2013, I went to Kashmir. This visit was facilitated by Christian Veterinary Mission, and I worked there through PI Engineering, which has field stations along the Sindh River Valley in Kashmir. They work with Kashmiri community workers. And I was there in the early summer, and the Bakarwal people were migrating north to the Himalayas to get to their summer pastures, and we met them as they passed through. As my experience with the herders in Kashmir is quite limited, please see this presentation as an introduction to this amazing pastoral group. The Bakarwal get their livelihood from sheep and goat raising. Wal means one who takes care of in the Gujar language, and Bakri means goats and sheep. They're part of the Gujar people, which is an ethnic group that is engaged in agriculture, and it's a pastoral community in India, in Pakistan, and in Afghanistan. They originally migrated to the area to Jammu in Kashmir from the area which today is northwest Pakistan. Almost all of this group are Sunni Muslims, and the Bakarwal are one of over 200 tribes in India and Kashmir that engage in pastoral life. The Gujar and Bakarwal tribe, they form the largest transhumance communities in the Himalayas. Of course, transhumance meaning seasonal livestock movement. They migrate between the Himalayan pastures of Kashmir and Ladakh, which is on the border of China, during the summers, and they're in the plains of Jammu in the south of Kashmir, around the Pir Jal range and below, in the wintertime. Some of the Gujars don't migrate anymore. They herd cattle especially, and buffalo, and they're involved in other forms of agriculture. Many of the Bakarwals have winter homes in the south of Kashmir in the Jammu district, but before they get to the scorching heat of the summer that dries out all their pastures, they head towards the Himalayas. And this assures that their livestock, their goats and sheep, have pasture all year round. Typically, they'll leave around April 15th, which is during the Baisakhi harvest festival. And sometime in June, they reach their summer pasture areas in the lower parts of the Himalayas. And they migrate in groups that are called kafias. So each group takes a certain route to the Himalayas, depending on which clan they're from. Some are farther west, travel up through the Valley of Kashmir, across the Pir Panjal Mountains, through Srinagar, and up into the area of Kargil. And then another set of groups migrate from farther east in the Jammu region, also across the Pir Panjal range, and up through to Pahalgram and areas north of that. So they usually travel for about 6 to 8 hours a day. And the women and children travel by horseback or with their horses that carry the tents, cooking supplies, horses and mules. And they will travel ahead to the next camping site and get set up there. The entire migration from southern Kashmir to the Himalayas takes approximately 45 to 55 days if it's all on foot. However, a lot of families will go the first 120 miles or so with rented trucks. They'll hire trucks for transport of their animals and their gear. And some families actually go right through the Pir Panjal Mountains by truck to Srinagar and start the migration on foot in that area. This saves a lot of time and costs money, obviously, a fair amount of money, but reduces the migration to 25 days. So they traverse a succession of valleys and mountains, mountain ranges. In the south is the Shabalak Range, which is not too difficult to get through, and then they arrive at the Pir Panjal mountain range farther north from Jammu. This can be a very dangerous crossing route, especially if they start out late or delayed for some reason, as they were during the COVID lockdowns the last couple of years. The weather can change quickly in this mountain range, and they can be trapped. They can lose animals due to hypothermia. Sometimes there's landslides in the Pir Panjal, and sometimes the roads are closed. So this creates a difficulty along the way. And then at least some of the groups migrate right through Srinagar, which is the capital of Kashmir. They encounter traffic. They encounter overused pastures. Environmental degradation happens because the pasture is limited and there's some overgrazing. During the lockdown, it was actually easier for them during COVID because there was less traffic through Srinagar. They can lose up to 10% of their animals from, obviously some from traffic, but mostly from theft in this region as they pass through the greater Srinagar area. Then they head up through either Pahalgram in the farther east or through Sonamarg region up into the Himalayas, where because of the melting snow, they find very lush, good pastures. This particular group that we were following was migrating through the Sindh River Valley up into the higher ranges above Sonamarg to the area of Kargil. And they migrate in what's called a kafia. They each go to a particular region and they have particular pastures that they go back to in the Himalayas. So they'll migrate from their arrival probably in June through August, or they'll stay in the Himalayan region and basically graze the sheep and goats and horses. And then in August, they'll pack up and head back south again. So a lot of the migrating herding families are under tents for that entire time, or plastic tarps. They'll use branches to make frames for these tarps. And that's how they live for those summer months. Other groups, however, will build shelters, more sturdy shelters, especially when they arrive into the highlands. And these shelters are made of logs. They have mud over the top, and there is obviously grass growing on those too. So there's wooden posts and wood or stone making up the walls. And they will go back to these same areas and find the sheds that they had, the huts that they had, and repair them, repair the mud and plaster that's on the outside, take off the weeds off the roof, take care of the leaks, and live in those for the summer. In certain remote areas where there's less forest, higher in the Himalayas, these huts will be built out of stone. So basically, the Bakarwal live in this environment for the summer, and they kind of become part. You can see the way they live; they become part of the environment, and they know the forests and the mountains very, very well. So the summer community structure is divided up into households called daras, and these will extend different daras out to different parts of the pastures over a large area. And the dara is a center of all socioeconomic, political, and religious activity during this time. It's the most dominant institution in their society, this extended family. So to keep the livestock fed, even in the mountains, they will move around, sometimes covering up to 300 kilometers in this high altitude area. And then depending on weather patterns, they will usually leave the Himalayan pastures in August and head back south, back through Srinagar, back through the Pir Panjal to the Jammu area, arriving usually in October. So what are some of the challenges that this people, the Bakarwal, face? One of the biggest challenges is education of children. Okay, You've got families that are on move for months, from April through August, and the young people drop out of school in Jammu. They want to be with their families and participate in the migration. They say things like, "This is what we've been doing for ages." There is a mobile school program started by the Kashmiri government in the 1970s that is in operation. It has had mixed success. The teachers come out of the Bakarwal community usually, or the Gujar community. Of course, they don't have buildings and they have few materials, but there are up to 33,000 children enrolled in these schools, 1,500 schools. But there's limitations, there's gaps in the education, limitations what you can do in the environment, and so most people feel that they're not getting the quality of education that they need. There's also not enough emphasis on traditional knowledge that's useful in their lifestyle. As I mentioned, a second big challenge is the geography and the weather, especially passing through the Pir Panjal range and other areas. There's a pass called the Mughal Road. Sometimes they have to take 2 or 3 day emergency stops due to the weather, the harsh weather, and to try to minimize animal losses, but they will lose animals as they cross through. Respiratory disease, hypothermia will be the result. I saw one video, it showed that a group basically lost 300 or 400 of their sheep and goats as they crossed through the Pir Panjal and ran into weather they didn't expect. During, as I mentioned, the COVID lockdown, transport, clearing of the passes was delayed on the roads, and also they had an inability to get vehicles to transport them, so they had to do all 400 kilometers on foot as opposed to getting up to or past the Pir Panjal. A third huge challenge is the military conflict with Pakistan, between India and Pakistan, which has divided Kashmir into 2 sections. The line of control is heavily militarized, and this line of control is in the summer Himalayan pasture area, okay, in what's called the Zanskar mountain range. Basically, the herders cannot pass through this line to Pakistan, okay. There's actually enclosure of some of the pastoral highlands and occupation by the Indian security agencies. Herders aren't allowed to go in these areas. The result is there is overgrazing and depletion of resources in certain areas because of the limitations of pasture. And actually, more recently, there's been an armed resistance within Kashmir against India, and this has limited transportation, sometimes movement through Srinagar or other areas, and affected the migration. So another challenge, the fourth challenge, is access to human health facilities and the problems created by the COVID lockdowns. But basically, these people are on the road and they have limited cash. They're living very frugally, and so they move through areas that don't have health clinics, especially up in the Himalayan pasture areas. There are very few health clinics. They have to travel a long way to these clinics. And even along the way, as they come through cities and that sort of thing, the price of care and medications is very high and is beyond them to some extent. Okay, so in general, the Bakarwal are very familiar with herbal remedies. They use a lot of traditional medicine and herbal remedies. And one of the issues is with climate change and with erosion taking place and other changes, they're losing some of the herbs. There's thought to be about, or studied about 1,100 medicinal plants in Jammu and Kashmir, and most of these are threatened, their habitat is threatened. So another major challenge, which is the one that I was most involved in, was animal health. In general, what I observed were that these animals were remarkably healthy, and the herdsmen were quite knowledgeable about the care of their Bakarwal goats and their sheep. But we did see lameness, a lot of lameness. Obviously, you have animals walking 300 or 400 kilometers, some foot rot and hoof infections. seem to be the most common diseases encountered during this migration, and also internal parasites, basically nematodes. You have mixing of herds of animals during the nighttime when they're stopped at different migration stopping areas. During the COVID lockdown, there was a shortage of medicines available for treatment, and obviously the longer migration created more vulnerability. Also, infectious diseases, sheeppox and goatpox are common in this area, and there's been several years, including 2021 and I think 2018 at least, where foot and mouth disease is prevalent and was found in the herds. The Kashmiri government does some vaccination programs before the start of the migration, which helps with these situations. The sixth challenge would be government policies. Okay, a lot of people say that the government does not really understand how nomads think and work. They're not versed in this lifestyle enough to understand how to help the Bakarwal people. So basically, in the early 1990s, the Bakarwal and the Gujars finally gained what's called, quote, scheduled status, which gives them some benefits to their education and livelihoods, meeting specific needs of that tribe. But in general, delivery of government services anywhere in the world, and in Kashmir as well, depends on kind of having an address, being in a place where you can be found, where you can fill out the correct forms and get access to assistance. So because this is a migratory people, they've had less access to government programs. And the last challenge I'll mention, a serious one, has been eviction from their pasture lands, from their homes in the mountains, and also eviction from their homes in Jammu in the south. So the Jammu and Kashmir Forest Administration has, in the wintertime, when people in the south put out eviction notices, requiring that the people remove themselves from the pasture lands. Basically, the structures that they built there for living under were destroyed, and they were sometimes even attacked or wounded in the process of going to the Himalayan region. So there was not only eviction notices, but also political or public moves to limit their migration to the high Himalayas. So this is actually a people that has been migrating in this area for centuries, but they're not very well recognized in this livelihood. So as a result of these challenges and others, one observer, one of the Kashmiri workers, predicts that, or estimates that about 30% less people are migrating during the past 20 years. Migration has gone down 30%, at least in the western route through Srinagar and Sonmarg. So what's happening is Bakarwal are deciding not to migrate. They're either staying back in Jammu and doing day labor, construction especially, and subsisting on that, or they're moving out of Kashmir because of the repression, moving out into neighboring states farther south in India, in different states of India. So there is probably about 20,000 tribal families that have left during the past 20 years, according to government statistics. The reasons they give for this migration, moving out of Kashmir, are many that I've mentioned. Tension in communities, shortage of fodder along the routes, shortage of space for their livestock, denial of rights over the forests, evictions, restrictions on the use of government land, the insurgency, present insurgency, and a sense of insecurity and harassment by other groups, loss of flocks, and theft, issues with education, schooling, and curbs imposed by the army on their movement into certain areas, especially close to the line of control. So we've got a difficult situation, many challenges, and many people leaving this lifestyle. So what are some possible steps forward or ways to help ensure healthy migration? Pi Engineering that I was working through, their approach was to set up what they called sheep camps in three points along the western migration route through Srinagar and along the Sindh River Valley. So they have one sheep camp which is very near Srinagar, and two others along the Sindh River in the lower mountains along that. And what they do is they set up the camp. There's some technicians that stay in these metal shelters, and basically as the herds come through, they provide especially worm medicines for internal parasites that are offered for free to the goats, sheep, and equines. They treat some lamenesses, they treat wounds, saddle wounds, hoof rot, and that sort of thing. And they have certain medications that they're allowed to sell to the herdsmen. And in addition, they offer some encouragement. When I was present in Kashmir, I was able to offer some veterinary training to the Kashmiri technical workers that were operating the sheep camps. The other thing that Pi Engineering does is builds these shelters with corrugated metal on the outside, very sturdy shelters that families can live in. And during the Kashmir flooding of a few years ago, and other reasons where people have lack of shelter, Pi Engineering will build these shelters for people. They've also gone to other countries to build. So besides the work that I was involved in, there's a lot of other things going on to try to improve life for the Bakarwal. One of the things has been finally a recognition by the government, this was in September of last year, 2021, that the 2006 Forest Rights Act of India also included the tribes in Jammu and Kashmir. So they're called the Forest Dwelling Scheduled Tribes of Kashmir, and they were finally included in the Forest Rights Act. This gave them certain individual and community rights as part of the Gujar or the Bakarwals or other tribes in the area. That is allowing them more to hold onto and live in forested land, either for cultivation or for grazing or for habitation. This is a big change from the evictions that have happened over the last few years. So this is an attempt by the government to recognize and alleviate the historical injustices that have existed against the Bakarwal. Other improvements, there are attempts to recognize and appreciate the tribal autonomy and distinctive heritage of this migratory people, and seeing it as a resource that can contribute to the national framework and not just something involved in competition for resources in the mountains or in the parklands. Okay, so we have one program that's starting up to equip Bakarwals and Gujars to be better forest citizens and to become skilled at range management. There's one long-term worker that I know that is developing a curriculum that incorporates indigenous knowledge as well as a more global understanding of animals and agriculture and also forest management, and moving away from a current model of education. And this program will actually be involved in three languages: the mother tongue of the Bakarwal, which is the Gojri language, and also a regional language, and then a more global language will all be incorporated in this program. The idea is to train Bakarwal in forest management and to hire them to do some management of the mountain pastures and forests, and give them people that obviously has a direct investment and interest in the region and in the ecology of the region, and putting their knowledge and their concern to work. I want to thank you very much. So references here, my email address is drpaulmain@gmail.com. You're welcome to dialogue with me further on this issue. Thank you.